At 73 years old, I received a text message from my son that was 11 words long. Those 11 words told me everything I needed to know about how he had always seen me, not as his mother, not as a woman with her own life and her own limits and her own hard-earned peace, but as a resource, a venue, a service that did not require consultation. The text said, "You're hosting Thanksgiving for 30 this year. Already told everyone." Not a question, not a request, a notification, the way you notify a caterer, the way you notify a parking lot. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen in my robe, holding my morning coffee with both hands the way I always do since the arthritis settled into my left knuckle. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and looked out my window at the oak tree in the backyard, the one my husband Dale planted 31 years ago when we moved into this house, and I breathed slowly. People who know me would tell you I am a calm woman. They have always told me that. My students told me that back when I taught 4th grade for 22 years at Millbrook Elementary. My colleagues told me that. My children told me that, usually when they wanted something and needed me to say yes without making a fuss. What I sent back was 4 words, but what I discovered 2 days later changed everything. Let me tell you about the life I had built before that text arrived and shook the table. My name is Beverly Harmon. I live in Clover Ridge, Virginia, a small city of about 40,000, the kind of place where the hardware store has been run by the same family for 3 generations and people still bring casseroles when someone dies. I have lived in this house on Walnut Bend Road for 31 years. Dale and I bought it together in 1993 with money I had saved meticulously over a decade of teaching and a small inheritance from my own mother. Dale contributed his savings too, of course, but the bulk of the down payment was mine. I remember the closing. I remember signing my name on document after document in a lawyer's office, while Dale kept squeezing my knee under the table because he was nervous and I was steady. I was always the steady one. Dale died 6 years ago. Heart attack, fast and without warning, on a Tuesday morning in March when he was shoveling the last of the winter's snow from the front walk. He was 69 years old. We had been married for 44 years. He was my best friend and my partner in everything. And when he died, I felt a space open up inside me that I have never filled and never tried to. Some spaces aren't meant to be filled. They're meant to be honored. For the first year after Dale died, my children were attentive. My son Mitchell called twice a week. My daughter Renee, who lives in Charlottesville, came down several weekends, and we went through Dale's things together and cried and remembered. I felt held by them. I felt like the family, though changed and smaller, was still a family. That warmth lasted about 18 months. By the 2nd year, the calls from Mitchell thinned to twice a month. By the 3rd year, Renee had her own new life, a second marriage, a step family, a full calendar, and I understood. I did not resent it. Life continues, and I had built enough of a life of my own to continue with it. I had my garden, I had my book club, 6 women, Tuesday evenings, rotating houses, 40 years running. I had my neighbor Carol, who was 71 and had the sharpest wit of anyone I'd ever met. I had my walks and my public library volunteer shift on Wednesdays, and my subscription to the symphony. I had Dale's oak tree, which dropped the most beautiful gold leaves every October, and I would rake them up slowly and feel close to him in the doing of it. I was not a lonely woman. I want to be very clear about that. I was a solitary woman who chose her company carefully. There is a difference, and it took me most of my life to understand it. My son Mitchell is 51 years old. He is a project manager for a construction company, successful and organized in his professional life, and somewhat less so in his personal one. He has been married to his wife, Candace, for 15 years. Candace is a woman I had made genuine efforts to love. She is not cruel, exactly. She is the kind of person who organizes the world by what it can provide her and has very little interest in the world beyond that. She is also the kind of person who calls herself a people person while making nearly everyone around her feel unseen. I had noticed over the years since Dale's death that Candace had developed a habit of speaking about my house in a particular way, not as my house, as the house. "The house is so big for just one person," she said once at Easter. "The house has such good bones," she said another time at Mitchell's birthday dinner. The house would be perfect for larger gatherings, she said at Christmas, looking around my living room with the particular expression of someone mentally rearranging furniture that is not theirs. I noticed. I always noticed. I said nothing, because I believed, perhaps naively, perhaps generously, that she was simply making conversation, that people said thoughtless things without agenda. The text from Mitchell changed my thinking on that. You're hosting Thanksgiving for 30 this year. Already told everyone. I set the phone down. I went and stood by Dale's oak tree for a while, even though it was early November and cold, and I thought about what this message represented. Not just the rudeness of it, not just the assumption, but the architecture of the assumption, the certainty that I would comply, that I had no schedule of my own worth consulting, that my house and my kitchen and my time and my 73-year-old body existed in service of whatever plan Mitchell and Candace had decided to make. 30 people in my house. A house with one bathroom on the main floor and a kitchen I had never once cooked for more than 12 inches. I went back inside. I picked up the phone. I typed 4 words and sent them before I could soften them. No, make other arrangements. Then I made a second cup of coffee and called my friend Iris. Iris is 76 and was a family law attorney for 35 years before she retired. She lives 4 streets over. We met at book club 17 years ago, and she is, without question, one of the sharpest people I have ever known. I told her about the text. I told her about my response. Good, she said immediately. Now tell me why you're calling me instead of just enjoying your morning. Because something doesn't feel right, I said. Something under it. Do you understand what I mean? There was a brief quiet. Iris always takes questions seriously before answering them. It was one of the things that made her a formidable attorney and a good friend. I understand exactly what you mean, she said. How long has Candace been making comments about the house? I thought. 2 years, maybe a little more. Have you reviewed your estate documents recently? I had not. I told her so. Come for tea on Thursday, she said. Bring them. I said I would. I sat with that phone call for a while after I hung up. The word estate had landed strangely, like something I hadn't thought I'd need to worry about yet. I was 73, not 93. I was healthy. I still drove myself everywhere. I still raked my own leaves. But Iris's question was not paranoid. It was professional, and Iris was not a paranoid woman. The unease settled over me like weather. I didn't shoo it away. I let it sit there and tell me what it was trying to say. That evening, Mitchell called. Mom. He sounded impatient in that particular way he had developed in the last few years, the impatience of someone who has already decided what you're going to say and is annoyed that you haven't said it yet. I got your text. I know, I said. I sent it. This is a big family gathering. Aunt Rosemary is coming from Florida. The cousins. Mitchell, I said. When did we discuss this? A pause. I'm discussing it with you now. You announced it. There's a difference. Mom, it's Thanksgiving. You always host Thanksgiving. I hosted Thanksgiving when your father was alive and I had his help, I said. And even then, I was asked, not informed. His tone shifted, that subtle hardening I recognized from when he was 15 and being told no for the first time about something he wanted badly. Candace has already called everyone. It would be really embarrassing at this point to change it. Then Candace will need to have a conversation with everyone, I said pleasantly, because I won't be hosting 30 people, Mitchell. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient. I could hear Candace in the background. I couldn't make out the words, but I could make out the tone. Sharp, directed at Mitchell, the kind of tone that sounds like coaching. We'll talk about this more, Mitchell said. If you'd like, I said. Good night. I hung up. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not guilt. Clarity. The solid, quiet kind. Thursday arrived and I went to Iris's house with my folder of documents. She had tea ready and reading glasses on before I had my coat off. We sat at her dining room table the way we used to when she was still practicing, and she would walk me through a legal question I had. Calmly, methodically, without rushing. She went through my will, my property deed, my health care directives. She was quiet for longer than I expected. Beverly, she said finally, when did you add Mitchell as a co-trustee on your property trust? I looked at her. I didn't. She turned the document and slid it across the table toward me. I am not a woman who panics. I have been through the death of both my parents, the illness of my child, the loss of my husband. Panic was never something I could afford. But what I felt when I looked at that document was the particular cold clarity of someone who has just seen the shape of something they had been sensing in the dark. My name was on the trust, and beside it, in the trustee section, was Mitchell Raymond Harmon. I had never signed that. I had never discussed that. I had never agreed to that. I need you to look at the signature, I said. Iris was already looking at it. Her reading glasses were pushed up her nose, and her expression was very still. "When did you last update your estate documents?" she asked. 3 years ago, after Dale died. I worked with Robert Finch. "Call Robert Finch," she said. I called him from her dining room table. He didn't answer. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible and saying it was important. Iris refilled my tea. I wrapped both hands around the cup. My left knuckle ached. "Tell me what this means," I said. Iris looked at me steadily. "It means that at some point this document was altered or a new version was substituted. It means someone added Mitchell's name to your property trust without your knowledge or consent." I absorbed that. "Can they do anything with it?" As co-trustee, he would have standing to make certain decisions about the property. Depending on the full scope of the language in the document, he could potentially act without your approval in specific circumstances. She paused. "It also means that if you were ever incapacitated, medically or otherwise, he could have significant control over the house." "The house Dale and I bought," I said. "Yes." I was quiet for a moment. Outside Iris's window, a cardinal landed on her bird feeder and looked around imperiously and flew away. "Iris," I said, "the Thanksgiving text." She nodded. "I noticed that too." We looked at each other across her dining room table. "They were coming to see the house," I said. 30 people, under the guise of Thanksgiving, to establish... What? Familiarity with the property? That's a darker reading, Iris said carefully. It might be simpler than that. It might just be Candace wanting to host a large gathering in a house she has convinced herself she already partly owns. But she doesn't. "No," Iris said. "Not if that document is fraudulent, and not as long as you're living and competent and capable of revoking whatever was added without your consent." She said the words living and competent very specifically, deliberately, and I heard what was beneath them. "Have they made any comments about my health?" I asked. "To you or anyone in the book club?" Iris set down her teacup. "Margaret mentioned at the September meeting that she had run into Mitchell at the grocery store. She said he told her you'd been having some memory trouble." I felt the cold again, deeper this time. "I have no memory trouble," I said. "I know you don't," Iris said. I looked at my hands on the teacup. My mother's hands, I always thought. Fine-boned, careful, reliable. These hands had graded 22 years of papers, had held Dale's hand through 2 surgeries, had planted every bulb in my front garden. "What do I do?" I asked. Iris smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 35 years knowing exactly what to do. "First," she said, "you call Robert Finch back. Second, you call my colleague Daniel Park, who specializes in elder law and estate fraud. Third," she picked up her own teacup, "you go home and you send Mitchell a text telling him you're reconsidering Thanksgiving." I raised my eyebrows. "Let them think you're complying," she said. "Don't change anything they can see until we know exactly what we're dealing with." I drove home slowly, watching Clover Ridge go by through my windshield. The hardware store, the library, the elementary school where I had taught for over 2 decades, the turn onto Walnut Bend Road, and then my house, solid and white and set back from the road behind the oak tree with its November bare branches. My house. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment. I thought about the closing in 1993 and Dale squeezing my knee under the table. I thought about Candace standing in my living room saying the house would be perfect for larger gatherings. Then I went inside, took my coat off, and started making notes. Robert Finch called back the following morning. When I described what I had found in the trust document, he went very quiet. "Beverly," he said, "I need you to come in. Today, if possible." I went that afternoon. He had pulled his copy of my trust documents, the versions he had on file from 3 years ago when we updated everything after Dale passed. When we compared them side by side, the difference was clear. His version did not include Mitchell as co-trustee. Mine did. Same document number, same formatting, same language, but not the same document. Someone had substituted a page. Robert was pale when he said it. "This is a serious matter, Beverly. Whoever did this is document fraud." "I understand," I said. "Do you know how they might have gotten access to your copy?" I thought about it. Mitchell had helped me move some things to the attic storage about 2 years ago. Files, paper records. I had trusted him in the house alone for portions of that afternoon. He would have had access to the original closing documents, the ones with the notary stamps, the seal impressions, everything he would have needed to study and replicate. Robert later confirmed that the substituted page carried a forged notary stamp, copied with the kind of precision that only comes from having the original in hand for an extended period of time. "I have an idea," I said. "We need to report this to Daniel Park and potentially to the authorities." "Not yet," I said. "I want to understand the full picture first. I want to know everything they may have done before I show them what I know." Robert looked at me over his glasses. "You're sure?" "I'm a former teacher," I said. "I never sent a child to the principal's office until I had done my own investigating first." He almost smiled. He said he would prepare a notarized affidavit comparing the two documents. He said he would loop in Daniel Park. He said to call him the moment anything else happened. I thanked him. I drove to the library for my Wednesday volunteer shift because routine was armor and I was not about to abandon mine. Over the next 10 days, here is what Daniel Park discovered. Mitchell had, in addition to the altered trust document, filed a form with the county assessor's office indicating himself as a property representative for the Walnut Bend address. It had no legal force on its own, but it suggested a pattern. He had also, according to a discreet inquiry made through proper channels, consulted with a local realtor about the estimated value of a property matching my address. That inquiry had been made 4 months ago. And then there was the brochure. Carol, my neighbor, brought it to me. She had found it in her recycling. She thought perhaps it had been delivered to her by mistake. It was a brochure for a senior living community called Sunrise Pines, located 40 minutes outside Clover Ridge. It was addressed to Mitchell Harmon at my address. Someone had been having information sent to my house to intercept, or had simply used my address to appear as though the inquiry came from a concerned family member at the same residence. The brochure had a yellow sticky note on the inside cover in Candace's handwriting. It said, "Ask about memory care wing. Good if things progress." I read it twice. Then I put it in my folder with everything else. Things progress. I had not had a single episode of memory difficulty in my life. I was sharp. I slept well. I did the crossword every morning. I had, if anything, gotten more precise and focused with age, not less. They were building a narrative. Not because it was true, because they needed it to be true. They needed it to be true so that the story, when they told it, would make sense. So that the house would have somewhere to go. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. Because people always expect anger in stories like this. What I felt was something older and steadier than anger. It was the feeling a teacher gets when she realizes a student has been cheating. Not rage, but a deep, sorrowful clarity about what has to happen next. I called Iris. "Thanksgiving," I said. "I'm going to host Thanksgiving." A pause. "Tell me." "I want them all in the room," I said. "I want to see who knows what. I want to look at my son across the table and let him think everything is fine, right up until it isn't." "Beverly," she sounded careful, "this isn't a courtroom." "No," I said. "It's my home, and I want to use it for something useful one last time before I make some changes." Another pause. "What changes?" "You'll see," I said. "Will you come? I'll need a witness." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll bring my good earrings." I called Mitchell that evening. "Mitchell," I said, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving." His voice brightened immediately. He tried to hide it, but I heard it. The relief of someone who thought the obstacle had dissolved. Yeah? I'll host, I said. 30 people is a lot, but I suppose the house is big enough. Mom, that's... He stopped, recalibrated. That's great. Thank you. I do have one condition, I said. What's that? I want everyone here, your whole family, Aunt Rosemary, the cousins, Candace's mother, everyone who's coming. Not 30, all of them. A brief pause. That's already the plan. Wonderful, I said. Shall we say 2 o'clock? He said yes. I said good night. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I got up and started making my list. Not a grocery list, a different kind of list entirely. The week before Thanksgiving, I met with Daniel Park and Robert Finch together. We reviewed everything. We signed the necessary documents. I made decisions about my estate that were, going forward, airtight, and clearly expressed and witnessed by 2 attorneys and a notary. I made one additional decision that I had been sitting with for several days, turning it over like a stone in my hand, until it felt right. I almost called it off twice that week. Almost. On Wednesday evening, Mitchell texted to ask if he should bring extra folding chairs. It was such a normal domestic question, the kind a son asks a mother, that I sat with my phone and felt the full weight of what I was about to do. Not to a villain, to my child, to the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them flowers. There were a few minutes sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet when I could feel myself wanting to find another way, a quieter way, a way that let everyone go home without anything being said. But then I thought about Candace's handwriting on that sticky note. Good if things progress. And I put the phone down and went to bed. Then I called my daughter Renee. Renee and I had grown apart some since Dale died, her remarriage, her stepchildren, the busyness of her new life. But she was still my daughter. She was not part of what Mitchell had been doing. I was certain of that. Renee had always been more like me. She observed, she considered, she was not a schemer. But I won't pretend I dialed her number without hesitation. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time first. There are moments when you realize that trusting someone is itself a kind of risk, and you choose to take it anyway. I called her on a Sunday evening when I knew she would be home. I told her everything. There was a long silence when I finished. Then she said, "Oh, Mom," in the voice that she had used as a little girl, when something had gone wrong that she hadn't caused but felt responsible for anyway. "You didn't know," I said. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't know. Mitchell mentioned a few months ago that he was..." She stopped. "He said he was trying to help you plan ahead, that you'd been worried about the future." "Did I ever say anything to you about being worried about the future?" A pause. "No. I'm not worried about the future," I said. "I have planned for the future. Carefully. With 2 attorneys. And what Mitchell has been doing is not helping. It is fraud." Renee was quiet again. I could hear her breathing. I could hear her deciding something. When she spoke, her voice was careful and sad. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to come for Thanksgiving," I said. "And I need you to let me handle what happens. Don't say anything. Don't warn him. Just be there." She said she would be there. She said she loved me. I said I loved her too, and I meant it all the way down. Thanksgiving morning was cold and clear, the way the best November days are in Virginia. The oak tree was stripped down to its bones, beautiful in its simplicity. Dale had always said the tree was most itself in winter, when there was nothing to hide behind. I made coffee. I made my pies the night before, 2 pecan, 1 sweet potato, Dale's mother's recipe. The caterer I had hired arrived at noon to set up the rented tables and chairs and to handle the actual cooking, because I was 73 years old and there were 30 people coming, and I had far too much on my mind to also cook a turkey. Iris arrived at 1:30 in her good earrings. She sat in the wingback chair in my living room with a cup of tea and watched the door. Guests began arriving at 2. Aunt Rosemary, 81 and sharp as a tack, with her cane and her red coat. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, their children loud and sweet-natured. Candace's mother, Peggy, a quiet woman who always seemed vaguely apologetic for being related to her daughter. Mitchell and Candace arrived at 2:15. Candace came in the way she always came into my house, with the proprietary ease of someone who feels very comfortable in a space, perhaps too comfortable. She looked around at the catered setup, and her expression flickered. Something calculated, reassessing. Mitchell hugged me. "Mom," he said, "thank you for doing this." I hugged him back. "Of course," I said. Renee arrived at 2:20. She hugged me for a long moment, longer than necessary, and whispered nothing into my shoulder. She didn't need to. We gathered at the table at 3 o'clock. 32 people, including the caterer's assistant, who was too kind and too young to be invisible. My house was full in the way it had been full when Dale was alive, warm and loud and overlapping. I felt him in it briefly. I let myself feel it, and then I set it aside. I sat at the head of the table. I always sat at the head of the table. This was my house. After grace, which Aunt Rosemary gave beautifully, the way she had given it at every family gathering for 40 years, and after the food was passed and plates were filled and the noise settled into the comfortable hum of a family at rest, I stood up. "I want to say something," I said. The table quieted. 31 faces turned toward me. Mitchell's face was pleasant, relaxed. Candace was watching me with the small smile of someone who believes they already know how the story ends. "I want to thank you all for being here," I said. "This house has held a lot of love over the years. Dale's love, my love, all of yours. I've been thinking a great deal lately about what this house means and where it's going, and I want to share some decisions I've made." Mitchell shifted in his seat, just slightly. "I've been working with my attorneys, Robert Finch and Daniel Park, both of whom some of you may know, to update my estate planning. I want everyone here to know that I am in excellent health, full possession of my faculties, and very clear about my intentions." I paused. I looked at Mitchell. He was very still. "I also want to address something that I discovered recently, which I found troubling. It appears that my estate documents were altered without my knowledge or consent. Specifically, a co-trustee was added to my property trust, someone who was never discussed with me and whose addition I never authorized." The table was completely quiet now. "I have notarized documentation from my original attorney confirming the discrepancy. That matter is now in the hands of my attorneys and will be addressed through the appropriate legal channels." I kept my voice even. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me. I say this not to cause a scene. I say it because I believe in honesty, and I believe that people in a family should know where they stand. Aunt Rosemary was looking at Mitchell. Renee was looking at the tablecloth. Candace's smile had not moved, but her eyes had changed. They had gone very flat and careful. Mitchell said, "Mom, I'm not finished," I said quietly. He stopped. "I have also revised my estate documents entirely. My will, my trust, my health care directives, all have been updated and are now ironclad and legally witnessed. My house will pass as I intend it to pass. My finances are in order. I am not a woman who needs to be managed or planned around or placed in a memory care wing that I most certainly do not require." Candace's face changed then, real change. The flat eyes went slightly wide. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, a thing I had planned precisely, because I believe in small theater when the moment calls for it, and I placed the Sunrise Pines brochure on the table, Candace's handwriting visible on the sticky note. "Ask about memory care wing. Good if things progress?" The silence was absolute. "I found this through a neighbor," I said. "It was addressed to my son at my address. I've had it reviewed. I understand what it suggests." Mitchell was looking at Candace. Candace was looking at the brochure. Peggy, Candace's mother, was looking at her daughter with an expression that was not surprise, which told me something about how much Peggy knew and hadn't said. "I am not angry," I said, and I meant it. I am sad. I am a woman who spent 44 years loving her family and 22 years loving other people's children in a classroom. And I know that people do things from fear and from want and from the kind of short-sightedness that comes from never being told no. I understand all of that. I looked at Mitchell directly. My son. My 51-year-old son who I had brought into the world and nursed through ear infections and taught to ride a bike on this very street. "But I will not be managed," I said. "I will not be maneuvered. and I will not pretend that nothing happened simply because it's Thanksgiving and the turkey is on the table." Mitchell's jaw worked. His eyes were wet. I don't think he had expected tears from himself any more than I had expected anger from myself. People surprise themselves at tables like this one. "Mom," he said. His voice was rough. We were worried about you. After Dad died, we thought. "You thought I was alone and fragile and the house was large and your father was gone," I said. Not cruelly. Plainly. "And some part of you began to think about what came next before it was time to think about it. I understand that. But there is a very large distance between thinking about it and doing what was done. And that distance has consequences." He looked down. Candace said nothing. For possibly the first time in her life, Candace had nothing to arrange. Aunt Rosemary, who had been watching all of this from her end of the table with the composed expression of a woman who had lived long enough to have seen most things, raised her water glass. "Beverly," she said, "your husband would be very proud of you right now." I felt Dale in the room again, briefly and warmly, and I thanked her with my eyes. "Let's eat," I said. "The food is getting cold, and the caterer did an excellent job." The legal process that followed Thanksgiving was not quick, and it was not easy. Nothing like that ever is. Mitchell retained his own attorney. There were letters exchanged and documents reviewed, and a period of several months during which our relationship existed mostly in the space between what had happened and what would come next. The fraudulent co-trustee addition was formally stricken from the record. Daniel Park filed the appropriate complaints with the state bar and with the county. Mitchell, in the end, did not face criminal charges, partly because of his genuine remorse, which I came to believe was real, and partly because the full execution of whatever plan Candace had been forming had never been completed. What had been done was serious. What had been prevented was worse. He was, however, required to sign a formal legal agreement acknowledging the fraud and to pay full restitution covering my attorney fees, a condition he accepted without argument and without asking me to reconsider. Candace and Mitchell separated in February. I do not take satisfaction in that, and I mean it. A broken marriage, even a flawed one, is not a victory. But I think Mitchell, freed from Candace's particular gravity, began to see his own life more clearly. He called me in March, not with an agenda, just to talk. We talked for an hour. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. "I knew it was wrong," he said at one point. "I told myself it was practical, that I was just planning ahead." "I know," I said. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," I said, "it doesn't. Are you ever going to forgive me?" I thought about it carefully, the way I always think about things that matter. "I already have," I said, "but forgiveness and trust are different things. The forgiveness is yours. The trust has to be rebuilt." He said he understood. I believed him. Renee and I grew closer in the months that followed. She came for Christmas, just the two of us. And we cooked Dale's mother's sweet potato pie together and watched an old movie and stayed up past midnight, talking in the way I had always hoped we would someday find time to do. It turned out the time had always been available. We had simply both been too busy protecting ourselves from the busyness. I kept the house, obviously. Walnut Bend Road, the oak tree, the garden, the kitchen where I had fed more people than I could count over 31 years. I kept it, and I keep it, and I intend to keep it until I am good and ready to decide otherwise, on my own terms, in my own time. I updated my estate documents one more time in the spring. They are now so clearly and thoroughly expressed that no one could mistake them, alter them, or work around them. Iris reviewed every page. Robert and Daniel co-signed. What I've built, what Dale and I built, will go where I intend it to go. To Renee. To Renee's stepchildren, who I have been getting to know and who are decent young people. To a small endowment at Millbrook Elementary that will provide school supplies every fall to students whose families can't afford them. It took me a long time to know exactly where I wanted things to land. But I know now. It feels solid. It feels right. I still do my Wednesday library shift. I still go to book club on Tuesday evenings. Iris and I still drink tea at her table and solve the world's problems with reasonable efficiency. Carol next door still waves from her garden. The cardinal still visits the feeder in winter. Life on Walnut Bend Road looks very much the same from the outside. On the inside, something has shifted. Not broken, shifted. The way a house settles into its foundation over time and becomes, if anything, more stable for the settling. I have learned, at 73 that kindness without limits is not love. It is an invitation that the wrong people will always accept. I gave generously for my whole life, and I do not regret a day of it. But I gave without a voice, without conditions, without ever once saying, this is how I am willing to give, and this is how I am not. And people, even people who love you, especially people who love you, will fill the space you leave with what they need rather than what you intended. I am not bitter. I want to say that clearly, because bitter is what people expect from a story like this, and I have never been willing to give people exactly what they expect. What I am is clear. What I am is present. What I am is here, in my house, making my own tea, tending my own garden, under the oak tree that Dale planted 31 years ago when we were both so young and so sure that love was all the protection we would ever need. We were wrong about that. Love is necessary, but insufficient. Love needs structure. Love needs honesty. Love needs a woman who knows her own name on a deed and speaks it plainly when someone tries to erase it. I am that woman. I always was. It just took 11 words on a November morning and everything that came after to make sure everyone else knew it too. Quiet people don't explode. They clarify. And sometimes the clearest thing a woman can say is not a long speech at a Thanksgiving table, or a letter to an attorney, or an argument won through sheer force of will. Sometimes the clearest thing a woman can say is what I said first, before any of it, before the documents and the attorneys and the brochure on the table. 4 words, sent calmly from my kitchen, holding my morning coffee with both hands. No. Make other arrangements. Everything after that was just the world catching up to what I had always known about myself. The oak tree blooms again every May. Dale planted it for me. I tend it for both of us. And it is, without question, the most beautiful tree on Walnut Bend Road. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below.